June 18th, 2010. Never before and never again since had I been so ecstatic about the release of a film that I'd sketched out a frankly terrible reel of drawings based on what I'd seen from the trailers and what I'd imagined the film could look like, that I'd taped every TV spot I happened to catch live, no matter how brief, so I could rewatch them again and again and again. And that I'd arrived at the movie theater well before its official opening hours just so I could be absolutely certain I would find good seats for the show. And I certainly wasn't the only one who had this experience. With all the vignettes, the tie-in promos, the 3D re-release for the first two movies which promised an exclusive sneak peek of the third, the fake vintage commercials for toys that never existed but sure as hell tricked me into thinking they had, the hype train leading up to Toy Story 3's release was unparalleled and even rivals some of the biggest cinematic releases of recent years. This was the toys equivalent of Avengers Endgame, years before Endgame was even a card on Marvel's corkboard. Far more than just a movie, it was a massive cultural event, a capstone for one of the most legendary film runs of all time, a homecoming for the characters who allowed that to happen, and if nothing else, just a remarkably exciting time for little 7-year-old me to be a Toy Story fan. I had grown up religiously watching the first two Toy Story movies in every way you possibly could. On VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, 3D, in the back of a car, on an airplane, it didn't matter. I was in love with these characters. I'd been counting down the days for when this moment would finally arrive since the very first teaser premiered almost a full year prior. Scouring the parts of the internet I was allowed to visit for any new promotional videos or clips I could find, browsing the official Toy Story 3 websites and playing all the different games, attending that 3D re-release as my first ever theatrical experience. Anything and everything I could do to prepare myself for Toy Story 3's release on June 18th, 2010. And all of that eager preparation was what ultimately led to me standing outside on that bright and sunny and swelteringly hot summer morning, waiting with bated breath on pins and needles for the employees to come open the theater for business and let all of us inside for the very first 3D showing of Toy Story 3. And at the time, I had absolutely no idea I would come away from all of this committing every last detail of my experience to memory so I could immortalize the day in my mind forever. I remember exactly what room we were in. I remember exactly where I was sitting. I remember exactly what the pre-movie splash screen that looped as everyone filed into the theater looked like. And I remember exactly how completely overwhelmed I felt being such a small kid, surrounded by a sea of Toy Story fans, young and old, filling the theater wall to wall. Getting the chance to watch a brand new Toy Story movie in the irreplaceably darkened atmosphere of a movie theater and on a screen bigger than anything I'd ever seen before was borderline sensory overload for my little mind, and I was loving every minute of it. Every moment the audience laughed, every moment they cheered, and every moment I heard someone fighting back tears around me, all of whom had been chomping at the bit, possibly for 11 years, for the moment they could finally see Toy Story 3 in theaters. And then, as a cherry on top of an already wonderful day, I came home from the theater to the surprise that my parents had gotten me not only the official movie magazine, but also the tie-in video game, both of which kept me plenty busy that summer. Toy Story 3 rocked my world so much that my parents even took me back to see it again just a few weeks later. Now, my reasons for loving this movie as a kid were initially very superficial. It was exciting, it was intense, and it made me cry. Hard. I will always vividly remember the very second I lost control of the floodgates and the tears came flowing out like a waterfall. But because I loved it so much, I kept revisiting it again and again as the years went by, and the older I got, I somehow grew to appreciate it even more as I began to understand the complexity of the story, and the grace with which it handles its overarching characters and themes on a much more intimate level. The only thing I fully felt and understood the significance of when I saw it in theaters back in 2010 was its emotionally draining ending, which unfortunately speaks to a wider discussion about Toy Story 3 that has spread throughout the internet over the last 15 years. Seamus Gorman said in his video on the film that when people declare this to be their favorite movie of the series, they will invariably cite the ending sequence as the primary reason why. And my reflexive instinct upon hearing him say that was one of frustration, but the truth is, he's completely correct. Both from the perspective of the people who love it and the people who hate it, Toy Story 3 is often judged solely on the quality of its third act because of how intensely and relentlessly powerful it is from the moment the toys are carted off to the dump to the moment the credits roll. Its fanatics will often gloss over or otherwise outright ignore all the incredible story and character beats that unfold while the toys are at Sunnyside in favor of hyping up its emotional finale, and its detractors will often say something along the lines of, "You only like this movie because the ending made you sad. There's nothing else of thematic value or substance to be found in the rest of the film." So to both of those groups of people, allow me to say this up front. The finale of this movie is tremendous and undeniably a major contributor to the quality of the film overall, as well as why people walked out of the theater loving it as much as they did. I've made no attempt to hide how much I adore Toy Story 3 and how its final act consistently makes my eyes water every single time I watch it without fail. I legitimately do not think I am physically capable of watching this movie, especially if done back to back with the first two, without crying at least a little bit. But there is still so much else about the movie that is repeatedly glossed over in discussions, be them positive or negative, which is a damn shame. It's often mockingly framed as, "It's just an overly plot-heavy prison escape movie that emotionally manipulated you by dangling your childhood in front of your face and almost burning it alive before taking it away from you. But oh my god, it made you cry, so I guess that means it's automatically good." And of course, it is true that crying in response to something is not inherently proof of quality. It is proof that you managed to emotionally connect with it on some level, which is something that's still valuable, but it doesn't tell you anything about how well written the actual story itself is. Which is why what I'm primarily interested in providing with this series is not solely an explanation of why the movie makes me cry, but a thorough examination of the actual mechanics of the film, the plot, characters, themes, and other things of that nature. Especially because, believe it or not, more recently I've seen some people attempting to systematically rip all of those things I just mentioned to shreds, which I was quite surprised to see because up until about 2 years ago, I was under the impression everyone was in unanimous agreement that Toy Story 3 was a phenomenal conclusion to the trilogy given how monumentally successful it was in 2010 both critically and commercially, and how much it continues to be praised by people watching it for the first time even to this day. So much so that some of my viewers didn't see much point in me dedicating an entire 6-hour-long series to praising this movie when everyone already knew how amazing it was. And no judgment to the people who told me that, it's a perfectly fair thing to say. But I assure you, there is a very, very vocal minority that takes significant issue with Toy Story 3, or at the very least, cites it as a decent movie with lots of structural problems that is heavily carried by its excellent ending. So today, in celebration of the film's 15th anniversary, I'm going to bring you along on an excruciatingly exhaustive, deep-diving adventure through Toy Story 3. We're going to go through the entire movie scene by scene, moment by moment, act by act over the course of the next 3 videos to break down as comprehensively and extensively as I can why nearly every frame of it is magnificent. Talking about why the plot holds up so tightly under scrutiny, how it handles its characters nearly perfectly, how eternally moving and cohesive its underlying thematic elements are, while also highlighting all the other elements of filmmaking collaborating in a beautiful dance of artistry to sweep you away across every single scene and why it all works together as well as it does. In addition to taking the time to thoroughly, but respectfully, eviscerate the biggest and most pervasive pieces of criticism that I often see levied towards the film, with timestamps in the description as usual for your viewing convenience. And I'm going to do all of that without dragging Toy Story 2 through the mud just to prop up Toy Story 3, because in case you didn't know, these two are the ones that most often get pitted against each other in heated debates to figure out which is the best Toy Story movie. I will, naturally, always defend that it's 3, but that sentiment doesn't come from a place of disrespect towards 2, because they're both such spectacular works of art, and the difference in quality is so minute they can easily trade punches with each other. I've said forever that I can completely understand why any of these 3 movies would be be somebody's favorite of the series. Toy Story has the most laugh-out-loud moments by a country mile. It has the most expressive character animation in spite of being built on the most primitive technology. It has a uniquely unhinged type of manic energy that's unmatched by any of its successors. And it probably has the most laser-focused character work because it dedicates the vast majority of its runtime exclusively to Woody and Buzz's development, with only the briefest of interludes taking place back at Andy's room. Additionally, since every other Toy Story movie makes efforts to separate these two characters for extended periods of time, if you love seeing Woody and Buzz working together as a team, or if not that, then at least seeing them on screen at the same time so their personalities can actually bounce off each other, it's no question why this would be your favorite. Not to mention, it arguably has the most satisfying third act payoff of the trilogy, and this single shot is one of the most iconic images in all of animation. Toy Story 2 has the best overall balance of comedy and drama, the greatest variety of set pieces and locations compared to its sibling stories, which instead choose to flesh out one or two smaller locations, and it definitely has the tightest pacing due to how delicately it balances Woody and Buzz's storylines, never lingering for too long with one or the other, complete with an adrenaline-fueled power trip of a climax that I rewatched again and again as a kid, and a triumphant celebratory ending that leaves me smiling ear to ear every single goddamn time I watch it. And if Buzz is your favorite Toy Story character, then it also tracks that this would be your favorite movie because it's the one where he gets to shine the brightest by leading the charge to rescue Woody and consistently demonstrating how capable and intelligent he is, while also giving his arc in the first movie one last punchline by forcing him to confront how deluded he really was. And Toy Story 3, well, that's what the rest of the series is for, isn't it? But seeing as the third movie is a much darker and more serious examination of what it means to deal with loss and confront your mortality head-on, leaning far more heavily into the drama aspect than the comedy, I can also understand why someone would prefer to watch the more whimsical entries in the series as opposed to something with the gloomier tone present in the third one. If you were perusing your film library on a Saturday afternoon or after a long day at work, looking for something to just casually pop in and watch, the first two Toy Story movies would definitely be far more suitable for that occasion. Because while Toy Story 3 is not without its moments of comedy, it is undeniably a very emotionally draining experience and probably not something most people would be in the mood to watch on any given day. I, of course, am not most people. The point here is that I adore this trilogy. I love all three of these films dearly, and if I ever find myself watching one of them, you can bet I will also be watching the other two very soon afterwards. And I'm not here to disparage either of those first two movies just to make the third one look better by comparison. Oh, also, I will not be acknowledging the existence of Toy Story 4 in the context of my analysis at any point in this series. It's just, I can't. That abomination exists with the express purpose of reversing this beautiful ending and essentially makes this entire movie and everything it sought to communicate entirely obsolete. Not to say that I won't be using its script as a point of comparison when discussing broader writing concepts, but when discussing the long-term in-universe impact of the story, characters, and themes of Toy Story, I will be operating as if the fourth film was never made, which is honestly a pretty good way to live life anyway.
So many people have said all along, oh, you're good, don't stop there.
Oh, I know, they
and
said
then
that
you
after
keep...
3, right? Because the first 3 wrap up so nicely in a little trilogy.
Oh gee, you don't say! Finally, while this series is designed to be a love letter to Toy Story 3, that doesn't mean I'm here to ignore any negative reception the film has garnered. If we encounter any arguments made by people who hate this film, which are embarrassingly inaccurate, I will have no compunctions about explaining why they fall apart immediately upon further examination. Which is not to say that I plan to pick anybody out of the crowd and prop them up as a punching bag. We don't have to call anybody out specifically to address the strength of the arguments they make, and I wouldn't even want to indirectly encourage anybody to seek these people out and harass them just because of how horrifically badly they misunderstand Toy Story 3. Just like I did in my Owl House video, I want to keep the discussion centered around how expertly crafted the film is. Of course, there's a very high likelihood you may recognize where some of these arguments stem from, even without me telling you explicitly, just because of how ubiquitous they've become in online discussion, but if you do, then let me make absolutely clear in no uncertain terms that it's completely unacceptable to harass them. Leave them alone, do not pester them, do not flood their comments, do not spam them on Twitter, I'm never calling it X. None of that is an appropriate response to being inaccurate when criticizing a movie. I'm not here to humiliate individual people. I'm here to demonstrate to the best of my abilities how remarkably well made this film is from every conceivable aspect of storytelling, something which can't be effectively done if I sit here and talk about all these great things Toy Story 3 does while pretending as if the criticism people levy against it doesn't exist. Questions regarding thematic coherence and whether things like Sunnyside Daycare's prison aesthetic cleanly fit into the overarching ideas and messaging, the integrity of characters both new and old, asking whether their worldviews and beliefs are rooted in any kind of internal consistency, and if their competence and capabilities are congruent with how they've been previously portrayed, or even calling into question whether the entire movie is simply a shameless retread of prior entries in the series. And of course, alleged plot holes such as, why didn't the monkey sound the alarm when Buzz was roaming the halls? How did the alien get stuck in the dumpster when it was sealed shut seconds before? How did Slinky manage to detach himself from the magnetic conveyor belt of the dump? And when you hear those questions for the first time, your gut reaction might be, yeah, I guess I never really thought about that before, and therefore assume they must be valid points to bring up without applying any further thought to them, especially if the person in question sounds authoritative enough to be convincing through just the confident tone of their voice. But when you take the time to examine this script as exhaustively as I have, when you analyze it on a structural level and start drawing connections between all the different plot points, you will ultimately come to the conclusion that Toy Story 3 is, in actuality, the tightest written film of the trilogy across every aspect of storytelling, and the vast majority of people's attempts to punch holes in Toy Story 3's script immediately crumble as soon as you analyze it with a fine-tooth comb and apply a little bit of critical thinking. I ripped Toy Story 4 to shreds because of how utterly broken its script was when I knew Pixar was capable of so much better, so it's only fair that I put Toy Story 3 under that same microscope, especially since a good chunk of the second act is devoted to an elaborate prison escape sequence which is almost entirely reliant on there being a well-founded and logical script at its core. If all you came here for was to hear someone talk about how amazing this movie is for 6 hours, then rest assured, you will certainly be well at home with this series. But if you came here because you're as frustrated as I am at the absurd levels of uncharitability and bad faith that is often directed at Toy Story 3, or because you found your confidence in how good the movie is starting to waver after listening to its most vocal detractors, wondering if all this time you would gaslit yourself into believing it was better than it truly was because of the hype train surrounding its release, or because Pixar was just manipulating your emotions, and you're hoping for someone to debunk those criticisms and reaffirm with supporting evidence and direct references that Toy Story 3 really is the masterpiece everyone said it was back in 2010, and that the Academy deemed as being worthy of a Best Picture nomination alongside the likes of other masterpieces such as Inception and The Social Network, then fasten your seatbelts and get ready for the wildest ride in the wilderness. We begin Toy Story 3 in the most bombastic way imaginable, with an electrifyingly epic western train heist that serves as a counterpart to Toy Story 2's awesome introduction, where in that movie Buzz got his big sci-fi opener, now Woody gets his big western opener, emulating the very first time we ever saw Andy playing with his toys. But now they've taken these characters and this scenario and exponentially blown up the scale with a massive train set piece jam-packed with helpless orphans, stylish car getaways, and life-scale versions of everything Andy always imagined in his head, making the toys' triumphant return to the screen as fresh and exciting as possible without straying too far from the things people remember about those original adventures, calling back to a few things from the second movie and nearly every significant line of dialogue in Andy's first Playtime, which, of course, is exactly what this is. Playtime. We know in the back of our minds that none of this is actually happening to the characters we love, as they're all safe in Andy's loving arms, but to them, it feels real, so it should feel real to you when you're watching it as well. When Woody fails to stop the train in time and it goes careening over the edge, everything grinds to a halt. The music descends into a somber set of strings, the world goes dead quiet, and they hold on this wistful shot for long enough to frame the event as if Woody and the orphans were in legitimate danger. Jesse's horrified reaction supports that belief, even though you subconsciously know it's all pretend, so that when Buzz heroically blasts up from the canyon below, it feels so much more impactful.
Glad I can catch the train!
Which is all in service of two objectives, one from a meta perspective and one from an in-universe perspective. For the audiences of 2010, who hadn't seen the toys on the silver screen in 11 years, this big bang of a reintroduction to these beloved characters was exactly the warm welcome they deserved, crafting what is essentially a big-budget highlight reel presentation where each toy that will be relevant to this movie, put simply, just gets to be awesome, is a fantastic way to rope everybody back into this world after such a long hiatus, is contextually appropriate because a massively over-exaggerated high-stakes action set piece is very much in keeping with the boundless and heightened imaginations real kids have when playing with their toys, and is also particularly poignant for setting up this specific story. Toy Story's introduction serves to establish the relationship Woody had with Andy, and Toy Story 2's introduction serves to provide a glimpse into more of Buzz's backstory by showing him in his prime in his actual source material, and revealing the evil Emperor Zurg for the first time after teasing him in the original movie, which is why Woody and Buzz are the stars of their respective openings for those movies. But Toy Story 3's intro gives everyone their own heroic moment to shine that's perfectly suited to their personalities and their abilities. Their own triumphant re-entry, stepping back onto the Toy Story stage after all this time so no one feels overshadowed or forgotten, demonstrating that Andy loves all his toys equally and doesn't play favorites when dreaming up these scenarios. Because more so than either of the first two movies, this is an ensemble story, exploring the toys' relationship as a unified family in their final hours with Andy, and this opening works to set that expectation for the rest of the film, especially with how it immediately communicates that Mrs. Potato Head in particular is going to be a lot more outspoken and frenetic than she was last time, having previously been unfortunately left behind during the quest to rescue Woody, which is the other, more important reason this opening works so well. Because of course, all the meta stuff I talked about will almost certainly be lost on anyone discovering this trilogy for the first time today and blasting through all three movies over the course of a single day, not having to wait like the rest of us did to see them back in action. But ignoring the meta perspective and strictly focusing on what this means for the characters in this world, the electric energy imbuing every frame of this Western adventure shows how exciting Playtime is from the perspective of the toys, because we've never really been shown that before. We've seen Andy play with his toys, and we know how excited and passionate he is when doing so, but when the toys are in their inanimate state, we can only imagine how it feels for them to be played with because we aren't toys. We don't know what it's like to see the world through that perspective. But Toy Story 3's opening finally offers us a window into their minds and allows us to experience that same feeling of exhilaration and wonder. It's all a visualization of how creative Andy is during his playtime and of how intensely valuable the experience that the toys share with their kids is, perfectly capturing the glory days of their playtime with Andy, because while we know the toys come alive whenever humans leave the room, to Andy, they're already alive when he plays with them, and so that's how the toys feel as well. And it is very much to the film's benefit to make the opening sequence as wildly over the top, fun, and bombastic as they could manage, knowing how heavy things were going to get as the story went along, and knowing that the audience wouldn't be given many more opportunities to feel this joyful wonder and triumph, or even just to breathe a sigh of relief. And if Pixar gets to flex their technical muscles in the process with all these explosions and race cars and lasers and aeroplanes and force fields and shockwaves, topped off with gorgeous environments and lighting, especially in how the sun reflects off the plastic of the toys, so be it. Of course, given the technological capabilities of the modern era, even back in 2010, it's basically a given that movies, especially from Pixar and other mainstream animation studios, will be breathtaking to look at unless you wish, because at this point there's really no mechanical limitation that artists and engineers haven't been able to work around so long as they have the budget to spare, which I assure you, Disney does. In fact, they have way too goddamn much of a budget to spare. What's commendable about Toy Story 3 isn't how lifelike the world looks, but in fact the opposite. It's how restrained they were when creating the art for the third movie that's so impressive. Because again, by this point, Pixar absolutely had the ability to design a photorealistic world. They had the experience and the technology to make just about anything they could imagine, and they easily could have made this film look hyper-realistic if they wanted to, But they didn't. They consciously chose not to go down that route and simply tasked themselves with updating the models, textures, lighting, shading, and everything in between so Toy Story 3 looks more modernized than the original two movies, but without making everything look so intensely real that it loses the charming art style those films had going for them. And that is something worth praising. When they choose not to flex how realistic they can make something look, but instead leverage their technology to enhance an already endearing artistic direction and maintain that style for all the toys, new and old, that Toy Story 3 is overflowing with, all of which have drastically different builds from one another with uniquely stylized mechanisms and a plethora of different material, including insanely detailed fabric and fur. And you can go as crazy with the visual fidelity and technical prowess as you want as long as you have the substance to support it, which this opening absolutely does. It shows just how much Pixar has mastered both the art of animation and hypnotically advanced visual effects, especially for 2010. It offers the audience the instant gratification they'd be hoping for out of the long-awaited Toy Story 3, and it excels with its narrative significance within the movie itself. Not just in the broader strokes of the story we're about to experience, but in the finer details as well. Like the license plate on the alien's car being One Eye Bart, or how all the toys bringing their unique skills together to accomplish a wider objective will become more important a little later on, or how the toys being restrained in a scenario that's seemingly impossible to escape from, and in which they are forced to resign themselves to their fates, foreshadows something of a similar, but also much darker caliber awaiting them as we reach the third act of the story. And also in how they cut off the Playtime sequence at the absolute perfect moment, right before this.
Buzz, shoot your laser at my badge! Woody, no, it'll kill you! Just do it!
Because it's safe to say that everything in this opening is well beyond the realm of believability. Of course it is. It's all just Andy doing whatever he thinks is fun and cool, represented with appropriately cartoonish physics and how the one-eyed gang is suspended in midair for a second before tumbling to the ground, or just the general chaotic nature of Buzz lifting an entire train up from the abyss and a dinosaur emerging from the earth. And yet, admirably, all of these events still somehow feel just grounded enough for you to buy into them as if they were really happening. As if Rex was the terrifying dinosaur he always wanted to be. But I'd hazard a guess that if they showed Buzz's laser somehow managing to perfectly reflect off of Woody's badge and directly towards Ham's ship and then proceeding to single-handedly defeat said massive spaceship with just that one blast from his laser when all it managed to do to the Corvette was slice it in half, and also while his hands were restrained by the monkeys despite needing his hands to activate his laser, that would probably have ripped you right out of the moment, even though you already know this whole scene is fake, because that scenario I just described is so impossibly far beyond the realm of absurdity, even for an opening like this. They knew exactly what line not to cross, the exact point they couldn't push the insanity to before your immersion would be broken. Speaking of things that aren't broken, Andy's toys, even after falling from such a great height, are still perfectly intact because he thought to preemptively place a pillow beneath the cardboard spaceship so none of them would take damage when they hit the ground. Such a small, blink and you miss it detail, but one that still communicates so much about how deeply Andy cares for these toys, no matter how often he has them beat each other up in his imagination. So much so that even after the decade that's passed between the end of Toy Story 2 and the main adventure of Toy Story 3, the toys look just as pristine as the day they were first unboxed, keeping Andy's willingness to preserve and repair them if ever they are damaged, consistent with his behavior in the past. Now then, if we really want to throw back to the glory days of Playtime and mirror the opening of the first movie, then the sequence wouldn't truly be complete without
You got a friend in me.
an iconic song that's intrinsic to Toy Story's identity, but also not one to be haphazardly dragged and dropped wherever you want for the sake of cheap fan service. And every time we've heard the song in the series thus far, it has been played with a very specific and calculated intent. At the beginning of the first movie, it was used to signify the bond between Andy and Woody, and then came back during the credits, but this time in reference to Woody and Buzz's relationship, with two different singers behind the vocals.
If you got troubles, then I got them too.
to represent the two characters who can actually talk to each other, rather than the one-way street that was its first usage since Woody can't talk to Andy directly. And then it's used in a very similar way in the second movie to remind Woody of the love he'd be throwing away if he went with the Roundup gang to the museum, and then again at the end to cap off the rocky journey Woody and Buzz had been on together as their loyalty and convictions were repeatedly tested, but this time with the increased scale and sonic resonance of a big band orchestra to complement the much bigger scope and stakes of Toy Story 2. Now, in Toy Story 3, it's back to the basics. The same orchestration and tone from the original Toy Story, but that's not a choice made strictly to exploit your nostalgia. Rather than being a celebratory tune showcasing the strength of a toy's relationship with their kid, it's now used almost like a requiem for Playtime of the past, drowning out the orchestra as we approach the hardest hitting part of the lyrics to strengthen their effect on the audience.
A friendship will never die.
And then prematurely cutting the song short right at that point, leaving the audience with an unsettling feeling of bleakness. A stark shift in tone that maximizes the impact of the moment without coming so completely out of nowhere that it feels jarring after having spent the entirety of the opening up to this point experiencing a roller coaster ride of pure wonder and excitement. We started with the non-stop thrills of the big blockbuster-style Western Playtime, but then steadily began to slow down the pace as we moved to the more mellow and melancholic yet still warm and uplifting and seemingly innocent montage, before finally tearing away that comfort and stability in this one moment, ultimately allowing for a completely seamless transition from the golden era of Playtime into the much more downtrodden future we're about to step into. Abruptly cutting to black with Randy Newman's voice echoing in your ears as we enter the hopeless void of the box the toys have been stuck in for years, waiting on pins and needles and deluding themselves into thinking that Andy might one day play with them again. Right now, the audience doesn't know exactly where we are in the timeline, and that's by design. The majority of Andy's room is kept out of frame, with the only immediately noticeable change being that the toy box is no longer in front of the bed where it used to be, now placed directly across from the doorway. And Andy himself is kept entirely off screen for the first part of the scene because they want to keep you in suspense. They want to shroud the toy's current situation in as much mystery as possible, deliberately withholding critical information and gradually winding up that coil of tension inside you tighter and tighter so when you get to this moment, the release point completely throws you for a loop after the montage we just watched, and the reveal stabs you right through the heart. Andy's 17 years old, and naturally is not interested in playing with his toys anymore, but they finally got sick of waiting around for him to hopefully change his mind and took matters into their own hands, getting a hold of Andy's cell phone and dialing the number with the house phone to force him to open the toy chest and hopefully remind him that they existed, that maybe seeing them would unlock some core childhood memories and encourage him to play with them again. But alas, the plan was a complete failure. Not only did he not play with them, he seemed actively annoyed by the disturbance and pays no mind to the toys at all, instead frustrated by Rex's iron grip on the cell phone preventing him from answering the call, and then carelessly chucking him back in amongst the rest of the toys before storming off without giving them so much as a second thought, blissfully unaware that Rex was intentionally clinging onto that phone for dear life because he didn't want to let go of Andy and be subjected once more to the cold depths of the toy box, or that Woody was subtly hugging the phone a little bit tighter just to help him feel closer to Andy in any way he could. I don't want it understated how effective this scene is, brief as it may be, at calming the audience down from the emotional high of the previous two scenes and perfectly synchronizing your mindset and emotional state with that of the toys. The camera is only ever placed at extremely restrictive and claustrophobic angles when inside the toy box to communicate how suffocating their lives have been over the last few years, but without tipping their hand for why that's the case and what's really going on here just yet. They also play the same music that was used during the birthday party heist from the first movie, which is not only a track that's narratively appropriate for the situation since the soldiers are on yet another mission, but it also brings you back to a familiar place and gives you the same tiny scrap of hope the toys are currently clinging to. A memory of a happier time when their lives were full of excitement and playtime, with the toys themselves being the last bit of color standing out amidst the rest of the depressively dull toy box. Every element of this scene is carefully built to bring you down to the toys level and lift your spirits with the possibility of a way out of this misery so they can rip that hope away from you when Andy opens up the toy chest. And once the secret is out regarding Andy's age, they allow you to fully understand the state of the toy's depression. The camera finally pulls back to reveal the rest of the room as you see for yourself just how severely things have changed since Toy Story 2. The youthful and vibrant color palette of Andy's room has now been replaced with a more desaturated lighting pattern, contributing to a much duller atmosphere, harshly contrasting with how bright things were just a few moments ago, with every square inch of the walls being covered with posters. Cars, world maps, university banners, sports accolades, Emperor Bellows, all built up in layers across the walls, with mere traces of Andy's childhood from the first two movies still partially visible, mostly covered up by artwork and banners more reflective of his teenage years. Posters on top of older posters that flesh out what Andy's life has looked like between movies and showing how his interests have evolved throughout his life. Though all this stuff probably won't mean much to you if you've already seen the trailers, but this is why I try to avoid trailers nowadays whenever possible, because sometimes you have things like Lightning McQueen's crash being spoiled months in advance. Could you imagine how mortifyingly effective this would have been if we had gone in cold and had no idea this was going to happen before walking into the theater? Oh well, Cars 3 is still great. But even if you have seen the trailers, this is still a very devastating, slow burn reveal, seeing that little kid, the first two movies' conflicts entirely centered around, all grown up, and you understand how dreadful the toy's quality of life has become. And they really did pick the best possible group of toys to comprise the starring ensemble cast of Toy Story 3, not just because of who they chose to keep around, but because of who they chose not to keep around. The ones who moved on to other places, such as Wheezy, RC, Lenny, and Etch, are characters memorable enough for their absence to pack an emotional punch, but also weren't important enough to the main stories of either of the first two movies for it to be particularly frustrating or unsatisfying that they won't be here for the final adventure of the trilogy, because when compared to toys like Rex, Ham, Slinky, or even the aliens, who were in the spotlight much more frequently, these guys didn't really get enough screen time for you to become super attached to them. The only exceptions to that rule being Mrs. Potato Head, as she was left behind in Toy Story 2, yet still stuck around for Toy Story 3, but then again,
You gotta keep them together because they're madly in love.
And then on the opposite end of this issue, we have Bo Peep, a character who, while never being all that crucial to the plot, did still have her moments of triumph and was always someone Woody was able to lean on in times of emotional crisis. And her absence is felt way more intensely than it is for any of the other toys, which is something the writers are acutely aware of. But while Bo did always feel like a key member of the gang and was a toy who Andy regularly played with, she was still Molly's lamp. And Molly clearly does not have the same emotional attachment to her toys that Andy does to his. We also now know, thanks to that which shall not be named, that her absence is a result of Molly donating the last of her baby toys to someone who we can presume is a family friend or possibly an eBid user, as it obviously wouldn't have made any sense for her to be donated to Sunnyside, because putting something this fragile into a room full of rampaging toddlers is like throwing juicy meat into a hyena enclosure, and also there wouldn't really be much purpose for a night lamp at a daycare that only hosts kids during the day, which is also probably the same reason she was kept out of this movie. Because aside from the fact that Andy simply wouldn't have had anything meaningful to say about her if he pulled her out of that box at the end, there's approximately a 0% chance she would have survived even half the stuff the toys had to endure in this movie, not the least of which is a fiery incinerator, which famously is a great environment for any kind of porcelain doll to be placed in. So you have a meta reason, her imminent and unavoidable destruction if she stuck around long enough to meet the Sunnyside kids, a narrative reason, Andy not having any reason to reminisce on her the same way he does for his other toys, a logical reason, there being no purpose for a lamp like this at Sunnyside, and a character reason, Molly not being as emotionally invested in keeping her toys around as Andy is, having outgrown them even faster than he did, which also neatly solves the problem of why the toys don't just go over to Molly's room after Andy leaves, because she is proven to be just as unviable of an option for them. When Molly harasses Andy about what she can steal from his room after he leaves for college, she is only interested in 3 specific things.
Can I have your stereo?
No.
Can I have your computer?
No.
Your video games?
Forget it, Molly.
Oh, and just the whole entire room.
Out of my room.
3 more days and it's mine.
But on the subject of his toys, she laughs them off entirely.
Why do you still have these toys?
It may also seem strange that Andy held on to the aliens since we've never actually seen him play with them outside of the opening of this movie. He doesn't seem to even acknowledge their existence at all at the end of Toy Story 2 when they show up alongside Jessie and Bullseye, and he certainly doesn't have all that much to say about them compared to most of the other toys during the ending sequence. Yes, I timed it, shut up. Obviously, there are some pretty big reasons why the writers needed these specific characters to still be around for this movie, but putting that aside for the moment and focusing only on Andy's motivations, he may not say much about them during the final scene, but sometimes less is more, and his wording here pretty much tells you everything you need to know about why he might have kept them around.
These little dudes are from a strange alien world. Pizza Planet.
They're the aliens from Pizza Planet. He obviously didn't win these 3 specific aliens during a trip to the restaurant, but they still serve as a reminder of all the fun times he had with his mom and sister at that place as a kid, and they're also intrinsically linked to Buzz Lightyear as evidence from the TV show and origin movie. Wait, but in Lightyear, the actual canon origin story for Buzz that got Andy so excited about the toy line, we didn't see those little green dudes anywhere! Shut up! Literally nobody cares about Lightyear. It's not the origin story of anything except my depression and apparently really stupid practices from Disney. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, the staff meeting. What's also really important about these returning characters is that in spite of how much their circumstances have changed, all the toys we know and love still slip right back into the dynamic they've always had with each other, even down to Buzz crushing on Jessie and making a fool of himself whenever he's around her. The fact that he hasn't worked up the courage to express his feelings to her after so many years is extremely realistic, and it also would have been wildly unsatisfying had they developed their relationship off-screen between movies. And hey look, the toys wrote Andy's cell number inside Buzz's wrist communicator because the writers remembered that he tore the sticker off in the first movie and would have the free space to write on. Always appreciate some solid continuity. Unfortunately, it's kinda counterbalanced by the fact that the Made in Taiwan text from the first movie is mysteriously absent. Strange. I wonder why that might be the case. And another change worth highlighting isn't one with the characters themselves, but the actors portraying them. All the original cast members came back to reprise their roles for this movie, except for Jim Varney, who unfortunately passed away from lung cancer just a few short months after the release of Toy Story 2. For most of the voice talent in this film, I don't feel the need to draw too much attention to them because they're all just as excellent as they were in the first 2 movies. But I think Blake Clark deserves extra praise for taking on the mantle of Slinky after Varney's passing, someone that Clark was very close with, and being able to honor his performance as well as he did. You legitimately would never know that Slinky was recast unless you were actively listening for the slightly, and I mean slightly, gruffer tone of his voice, and even then you still might not be able to tell the difference because that's just how good of a job he did of honoring his legacy. And there's even a small chance that some of you might have learned about this recast for the first time watching this video. Unlikely, but still, it's a chance. All in all, it's extremely bittersweet to see how much things have changed from the bustling office environment and jam-packed staff meeting of the first movie to there now only being a few toys left, standing alone in a version of Andy's room which, despite being technically more cluttered than it was previously, feels more barren now than it ever has been. It almost gives off a post-apocalyptic vibe seeing how eerily empty this room is, as Woody admits that they've exhausted all their options and Operation Playtime was their last shot at getting Andy's attention before he heads off to college, and has to do his best to quell his friends' growing concerns of what will become of them when they don't have a kid to be with anymore, which are not assisted by the army men jumping ship for fear of being thrown away and subsequently planting that fear into the minds of the other toys. The toys are understandably hysterical at such a possibility, yet through it all, Woody continues to prove what makes him such a great leader for these toys. Throughout this speech, you know Woody's just as concerned as the rest of them. When Rex mentions Bo's departure from the group, he's caught off guard. He hesitates in his speech and loses his bravado in a brief moment of vulnerability before regaining his composure so as to not let his friend sink down to that same pit of despair. It's only after the staff meeting is adjourned and he has a moment of peace to himself that he looks wistfully and longingly at Andy's room, confiding in Buzz that he doesn't truly know what the future has in store for them. But even in spite of his anxieties, Woody continues to demonstrate his ability to remain calm under pressure as everyone looks to him for guidance in a time of total uncertainty, reassuring his friends that Andy's gonna take care of them without ever lying to them outright, arguing that if Andy still held on to them after so many yard sales and spring cleanings, he must still care about them, trying to cheer them up by presenting all the positive aspects he can think of about a life in the attic, and not directly shooting Rex down when Woody floats the possibility of Andy having his own kids someday, and he asks,
And he'll play with us then, right?
instead telling him that
We'll always be there for him.
not one to make a promise he knows he can't keep. What's most impressive about this whole sequence is how engaging it is to watch in spite of how dire and demoralizing their situation is right now. Even though this staff meeting creates a very sullen atmosphere for the toys as they work to establish the current state of affairs for the audience, and is technically speaking extremely dull as far as the content of the conversation itself is concerned, it doesn't come off that way because the toys maintain their dynamic from the first two movies, giving every one of them a chance to get a word in and voice their concerns about the situation. Concerns you as the audience also want to see resolved, having just experienced firsthand a taste of what the toys are going through. And this is consistent across every single subsequent scene where you have this massive group of toys all talking to each other about their situation and what they should do next. Every toy always contributes equally to the discussion, not out of obligation to make sure the characters keep constantly spewing dialogue, no matter how superfluous it may be, just so you don't forget about any of them, or so the filmmakers can keep having excuses to work with actors they really like, but because each and every one of them is an important part of the family with unique opinions and perspectives and will be treated as equals in this ensemble story instead of exclusively focusing on the main leads. Well, except for the aliens, I suppose. They're rather quiet this time around. The movie never feels weighed down by the decision to juggle so many characters at once, and is instead made stronger by including such a wide variety of voices, transforming what could have easily been a boring, slow-paced exposition dump where everyone's simply standing around and talking without anything more interesting going on that just puts the audience to sleep, into a highly engaging debate about what the future for these characters we've come to care so deeply about might look like and should look like now that everything's changed so drastically and nothing is certain anymore. A sentiment that is further aided when the army men come in to disrupt the flow of discussion with their comments about trash bags. Everyone's original concern was having to deal with the static and monotonous nature of living in the attic for the foreseeable future, but the army men's departure throws an enormous wrench into their expectations and massively derails the momentum Woody had going for him in his speech before this point, making the staff meeting much more chaotic and forcing Woody to scramble to calm everyone down even when he's just as freaked out as they are, but knows he can't ever let them see that. And this disruption is exacerbated by the subsequent scene where Andy comes back into the room and his mom lays down the law about having to actually start the college packing process, either bringing stuff with him, storing it in the attic, or throwing it away, especially in regards to his toys, as not only does he say,
No one's gonna want those old toys. They're junk.
which would already be enough to further rattle the precariously fluctuating faith the toys have in Andy, but also goes as far as to actually grab a trash bag and dump all his toys inside it, pausing for a moment when he reaches for both Woody and Buzz, looking between the two most special toys he's ever had and contemplating where he wants to put them, just as he did in the first movie, but this time it's Buzz who gets the short end of the stick, as Woody is the only one who emerges unscathed by settling comfortably into the college box while the rest are sealed away inside the trash bag. And at this point, everything's up in the air for what will become of the toys. Their absolute worst fear has come to fruition, and Jessie specifically is most strongly affected by this turn of events because of her history with abandonment and subsequent development of claustrophobia. Even though we already saw her happily bouncing around this incredibly claustrophobic toy chest a few minutes ago, she isn't in any imminent danger here, which cannot be said for when she's thrown into a trash bag, and she has her friends by her side here as a support network. As long as Jessie isn't in any tangible danger and isn't left alone, she won't feel like the walls are closing in on her, which is consistent with every piece of Toy Story media whose existence I'm willing to acknowledge. But as soon as the army men mention trash bags and the reality of Jessie's situation starts to really sink in, and especially after she ends up enclosed in a trash bag herself, she immediately starts hyperventilating as she's brought back to the same horrifying darkness from her days following being abandoned by Emily. Only instead of being donated to charity, this time she's gonna end up on the curb, waiting to be collected and crushed by a garbage truck. Or, well, That's what they think is happening here. Woody and the audience both discover that Andy doesn't actually want to throw away his toys in spite of how he referred to them previously, and he was just gathering them up to be placed in the attic. But thanks to a series of highly unfortunate events, there's a mix-up with Andy's mom, and they eventually end up on the curb as trash nonetheless. And this is the first major point of contention for those who aren't a big fan of Toy Story 3. That the chain of events which changes the trajectory of this trash bag from the attic to the curb and subsequently kickstarts the rest of the story is predicated on a lot of illogical, contrived, and convoluted things. And I can certainly understand why it feels that way to some people, because the way Michael Arndt wrote this was by beginning with the main event he wanted to build toward, that being the toys ending up in a trash bag seconds away from getting grinded to pieces, because of how visceral and inciting incident that is for the characters and how perfectly it ties into the conflict of the story, and then reverse engineer the plot from that point to get the characters into that position. But the simple fact that someone plotted their story backwards doesn't mean the pieces they retroactively laid down to help form the bigger picture they're trying to achieve are guaranteed to be flimsy and nonsensical. So let's take this sequence apart, piece by piece, and examine how flimsy it really is, shall we? It begins with Andy choosing to specifically use a trash bag as a means to store his toys in the attic so that Andy's mom will be able to take one glance at it and then automatically assume that it must be filled with garbage. To some, the idea that Andy would use something designed for garbage as a storage device for attic items is completely asinine, but I never batted an eye at this decision because, for one thing, Andy clearly doesn't want to be doing any of this right now given how annoyed he was at his mom's insistence to start packing everything away, and since she only gave him one box for college stuff and then a box of trash bags to start out with, he didn't have any other boxes on hand to pack them away in, and so chose the quickest and easiest solution to get this all over with as fast as possible, which seems to be right in line with how a real teenager would act. And secondly, as a more personal anecdote, my family used trash bags for this exact purpose all the time. Since they're a lot more malleable than a rigid cardboard box, it's easier to store a higher volume of things in a more condensed area, and if you have to climb a ladder to get into the attic, it is significantly easier to do that when carrying something you only need one hand to hold on to, very serendipitously demonstrated as Andy effortlessly scales the ladder with one hand while Molly walks out of her room holding the Sunnyside box and struggles to carry it when she wasn't even on the ladder. This does beg the question of why Andy's mom would immediately leap to the conclusion that this bag must be trash if it's commonplace for the family to use trash bags as a means of storage, but at the end of the day, that is still what trash bags are primarily used for, and she did just encourage him to use these bags to throw things out mere moments ago.
Apple core, trash. You can do the rest.
And if you still don't believe in any of this, if you think it's totally absurd that Andy's mom would assume Andy meant for this bag to be trash without even so much as asking him to confirm, it might entice you to learn that this wasn't just something Michael Arndt made up out of thin air to build to that payoff he ultimately wanted. This stemmed from a very authentic place, let's say.
My wife had these beloved stuffed animals from her childhood, and several years ago we were moving from one apartment to another, and she had put all the stuffed animals in a garbage bag, and I thought it was trash, and I threw them in the bin behind our building. We moved, and 5 weeks later she said, "Where are my stuffed animals?" And I realized with horror what had happened.
This happened in the movie. That was you.
Yeah, that was inspired by what I did to my wife's toys. So I hopefully I've immortalized them in some small way, and I can beg some forgiveness.
Oh, also, this literally happened to me. I kid you not. While I was in the middle of editing the audio for the series, I was visiting my family for the holidays and had packed a white garbage bag full of stuff that I wanted to take with me somewhere, something my family had routinely used garbage bags for ever since I was in diapers, and then some galaxy brain picked it up along with the rest of the trash and just threw it away. Bye-bye! I never want to hear anybody call this a plot hole in Toy Story 3 ever again. This happens. People do this. No, I'm not still mad about it. No, I actually didn't want the Titan pajama pants from watching and dreaming that I spent $40 on. Everything's just peachy. Now, there is one remaining element of this trash bag mix-up we've yet to talk about. Divine intervention. The argument here is that the ladder retracting so inexplicably and spontaneously is a huge part of what leads Andy's mom to assume this bag must be trash, and that had it remained pulled down, she would have likely been able to connect the dots for what Andy was trying to do, and thus the movie could have been avoided entirely. I don't know that I buy she wouldn't have still arrived at the same conclusion even if the attic was open because of the reasons I outlined previously, but assuming she wouldn't have, the most you're gonna get me to say is that it is inconvenient that the attic ladder closed up like this. Not impossible, or even unlikely considering how incredibly inconsistent and unpredictable old rickety mechanisms such as this can often be, but inconvenient nonetheless. In the same way that the main adventure of Toy Story is only set in motion because of an extremely convoluted and entirely accidental Rube Goldberg contraption that knocks Buzz out the window, and Toy Story 2 is only set in motion because Al happened to stumble into what is almost certainly the only yard sale in town which contained the priceless collector's item he'd been looking for. Some examples will naturally be worse than others in regards to how far you can stretch things before they become entirely unbelievable, but generally speaking, something lucky or unlucky happening as a means to kickstart your story is perfectly acceptable, while something lucky or unlucky happening to bail your characters out of a sticky situation is terrible writing. Barring the erratic nature of the latter, this whole sequence is built entirely on the character motivations and plot points which preceded it. Andy's mom puts her foot down and demands her kids start cleaning out their rooms to varying extents because today's garbage day.
Come on, it's garbage day.
Because of this oppressive sense of urgency, Andy begrudgingly and hastily gathers up his toys in a trash bag because that was what his mom gave him to work with. Because Molly was also asked to give her stuff away at the same time as Andy, he is temporarily sidetracked with helping her carry her stuff downstairs. Because it's garbage day, his mom is taking out the trash, and because she told him to start throwing stuff away, she assumes Andy must have left the trash bag behind and decides to finish the job for him. And how likely is it that a rickety old ladder shown to be built with some amount of automation in its functionality as opposed to needing to be completely manually operated would close unprompted by any human input? Entirely within the realm of possibility. Now, let's finally continue on with the plot, as Woody has to act fast to rescue his friends from certain doom, and in trying to figure out what to do next, calls back to Toy Story 2 almost word for word.
Think, Woody. Think. Oh!
Only what may have worked 10 years ago no longer does, as Buster has seen better days, to put it lightly. We've already had quite a few callbacks to the previous two films, even though those movies only been going for about 15 minutes, which in some cases would be a point worth criticizing as a transparent attempt to make the audience go, "Hey look, it's that thing I recognize, and that makes me happy," banking entirely on the emotional value of the thing they're pilfering from without any substance of their own. But in Toy Story 3, these references and parallels aren't included just to jangle some shiny toys in front of your face for nostalgia. They're used to strengthen the narrative by explicitly highlighting how much things have changed, like hosting another staff meeting to show how much the scale has been shrunk down, or directly challenging the beliefs Woody and Buzz agreed upon at the end of the second film.
When it all ends, I'll have old Buzz Lightyear to keep me company. For infinity and beyond.
As the delivery of these lines convey Woody's starting to doubt his own conviction in the face of so much uncertainty.
Whatever happens, at least we'll all be together.
For infinity and beyond.
Or showing an aging Buster slogging along close to the end of his life in contrast to the ball of unbridled energy he used to be. And this is also probably the earliest example of one of the other things about Toy Story 3's writing that works so well, the way in which it blends together comedy and drama, sometimes within the same moment. Because yeah, it's funny seeing old Buster collapsing on top of Woody, leaving him gasping for air, aided by the timing of how quickly he topples over after yawning, the exaggerated animation on Woody's face, and of course, Tom Hanks' delivery.
No, Buster, no!
But simultaneously, the prolonging of the joke reinforces and strengthens the building tension left over from the previous scene because Buster falling asleep is also what's holding Woody back from rescuing his friends. Though, fortunately, the toys don't need to rely on Woody to bail them out because they have Buzz with them, who you can always count on to maintain a level head in devastatingly stressful situations even when everyone else around him is freaking out, and who will always be smart enough to come up with a plan, which is exactly what he does here when deciding to use Rex's tail to poke a hole in the bag they can use to escape. And I'd also like to take this time to call attention to how absolutely stunning the simulation tech on the trash bags is. This isn't a case of something looking so groundbreakingly drop-dead beautiful that you could hang the shot up on a wall of an art museum. It's the natural and fluid way in which these bags react to being grabbed, thrown, cut, and stretched to their limits by the characters. There are so many dynamic elements at play here, which I'm sure were enough to send any technical director running for the hills. But they executed on their goals flawlessly, and most viewers probably don't even think about it. When you see a shot like this, you feel naturally inclined to comment about how gorgeous the lighting is and just how much it looks like real life because they're deliberately framing it that way to catch your attention in the trailers and so people can take screenshots to post on twitter.com and say how amazing the movie looks. But these trash bags aren't a case of the animators trying to show off what they can do with modern technology to impress critics and audiences alike. This was something that the story demanded, and it was up to the tech team to figure out how to make it work. And because it's such a natural element of the scenes and most people wouldn't think to mention it, I wanted to take the time to give a standing ovation to anyone who contributed to engineering the tech required to make this all work, because I can't even fathom how long it would have taken to perfect. Yeah, remember earlier when I said Pixar could make just about anything they could imagine? Well, I phrased it that way for a reason, because it turned out they hadn't quite overcome every possible technological hurdle, and trying to simulate the specific way that light shines through the triple-ply, high-density polyethylene material of trash bags, or the specific way that they sprawl and dangle when held or dropped or rolled along the floor or sliced open with scissors, nearly brought the studio to its knees. All for something the average person would never even notice as being a significant feat of animation. Speaking of things that nobody notices... Yeah, I know, his name is listed in the credits, he's voiced by the same person, he's wearing the same shirt. It seems really silly to claim that nobody notices that this is Sid from the first movie, considering how blatantly obvious it is, but I've learned over the last couple years that a lot of people genuinely do not realize that this is the same character and think that's just a theory. A film! But no. It's not. Please stop saying that. It's getting on my nerves. Anyway, Sid is such a non-entity in this movie that if you replaced him with just a regular, nameless garbage man, it really wouldn't change anything about the film, for the most part. But I still really appreciate that they found a place for him in the finale of this trilogy, considering how pivotal of a character he was in the first movie. It's nice to see that he's doing alright after being traumatized by the toys. Which I'd say is pretty believable. It has been about 10 years since the events of that first movie. Is he still freaked out by toys? Probably, at least a little bit. Is he still occasionally reminded of that horrible day? Almost certainly, but it hasn't completely dominated him, and it's nice to see that his life wasn't totally destroyed forever because of his immaturity when he was, you know, a child, and in a way, he sorta gets to take a bit of revenge by crushing all the toys that people throw away. I mean, it's not like he's checking in the contents of the trash first to know that for sure, but, you know, it's the thought that counts. Some people question why Sid's still around to be able to pick up Andy's garbage, even though they moved away at the end of the first movie, but it's not like garbage trucks are only allowed to visit one specific neighborhood, and Sid works for the Tri-County Dump Waste Management Service, which would logically service the entire Tri-County area. Another neat thing about this scene is that even though they don't explicitly show the toys breaking out of the trash bag, they still tip their hand for the more attentive viewers that they made it out safe and sound before the actual reveal, because when Andy's mom first brought them to the curb, even though she was only holding 2 bags, there were a total of 3 bags there, but by the time Woody gets down there and starts slicing open bags to try to find his friends, there are only 2 left by the mailbox for Sid to grab and toss into the truck. And it continues to show how unflappable Woody is when it comes to protecting the people he cares about, not hesitating for a second to leap out the window just like Buzz did for him in Toy Story 2, and charge straight for the trash bags, running the risk of getting seen as Sid's rapidly approaching, and even after the truck starts driving away, he's still racing to catch up because Woody would never give up on his friends, no matter what. Again, more attentive viewers will have already spotted the discrepancy and know that the other toys are safe, and most people will probably just assume that to be the case anyway, since we're still only 16 minutes into this movie, but think of how crushing this moment would be from Woody's perspective, feeling like he failed to keep them safe, and that everyone he'd come to care about during his time with Andy just got demolished in the blink of an eye, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Thankfully, he hears a recycled bottle clanking around and turns to discover his friends did figure out a way to escape, which then brings us to what I think I can confidently say is people's biggest point of contention with Toy Story 3, even among people who love this film. The toys' decision to donate themselves to daycare, in spite of Woody's insistence that Andy really did care about them and wasn't trying to throw them away. A lot of people find it extremely frustrating that even after everything the toys have gone through together and how Woody has consistently been right about literally everything.
It is Buzz! Woody was telling the truth!
The other toys still refuse to listen to him when he adamantly insists that Andy was trying to put them in the attic. Whereas I find this criticism extremely frustrating to listen to because, as was the case with the initial trash bag mix-up, when you stop to actually break down the structure of this sequence and look closely at how all the narrative pieces link together as a whole, you will come away impressed with how extensively they worked to lay all the groundwork for the schism between Woody and the other toys such that it makes complete and total sense, even if you still find it personally frustrating. The first step they took to accomplishing that was showing Woody as being staunchly, almost annoyingly committed to defending Andy's honor no matter what, which is consistent with his character throughout the first two movies as well, especially after Toy Story 2, where he came within an inch of throwing away his life with Andy forever. So it makes sense for Woody to cling to him even more obsessively than before after coming so close to losing him. But fundamentally, this has always been who Woody is, a character with a supremely stubborn amount of loyalty to his kid. However, it was much easier to buy into Woody's platitudes about Andy taking care of them in the first two movies.
Hey, listen, no one's getting replaced.
And always being there for him no matter what.
It doesn't matter how much we're played with.
It's easy to say, yeah, it doesn't matter how much we get played with when they were regularly and lovingly being played with. But as the years go by and Andy plays with them less and less, and their attempts to get his attention grow more and more desperate, everyone else ultimately accepts that Andy has moved on from his toys, whereas when they look at Woody, they can't help but see anything other than an inability to let go and move on from the past. Nobody thinks Woody's acting out of malice here like in the first movie, where they genuinely believed him to be a vicious murderer trying to con his way back into Andy's room. They just think he's in denial, since so many other toys had already been lost over the years, but Woody's the one toy everyone collectively agrees Andy actually cares for and wanted to bring with him to college, which as far as they're concerned, puts Woody in an awfully biased position, leaving him incapable of objectively judging what Andy was doing. Mr. Potato Head saying,
"Get it through your vinyl noggin, Woody. Andy doesn't want us anymore."
In addition to Jesse's tender and calm attitude when saying,
"Andy's moving on, Woody. It's time we did the same."
All comes across as an attempt to reason with someone who's just unwilling to accept the truth about Andy, only lashing out when Woody similarly escalates the intensity of his attitude once they're all in a box headed to Sunnyside. Remember that during the staff meeting, they showed that the other toys had already been teetering on the edge of losing faith in Andy, and even after Woody fervently insisted that Andy would make sure they were taken care of, they still wound up nearly being thrown away and ground up in the back of a garbage truck. As such, they would, of course, immediately assume the worst regarding his motivation after the army men teed them up so nicely with their little speech about the trash bags, and the only thing that could have ever motivated the toys to fully turn against Andy is a visceral enactment of the worst possible fates that they feared could one day befall them. Woody already had a hard enough time getting everybody to buy into the idea that Andy still cared about them when they hadn't almost been killed, so now that they have as a result of what they believe to be Andy's decision, combined with the fact that the other toys know how fiercely vehement Woody gets about this stuff, and that he would also have a pretty strong motivation to lie, or at least deny reality as a coping mechanism, in order to convince them that Andy really wanted them, trying to overturn their beliefs would be an impossible task for even the most persuasive and rational-minded toy. Also remember that Andy literally called them junk, said no one would want those old toys, proceeded to put said toys into a trash bag, which he had many valid reasons to do as I went over earlier, and they ended up on the curb immediately after that with only seconds to act before they would have been gone forever. I really don't know what other logical conclusion you could possibly arrive at in that scenario from the perspective of the toys. We, as the audience, have all the information, but the toys do not have access to that same information from inside the trash bag. Being confined to that thing is naturally going to muffle the sound from outside, and Jesse's hyperventilation on top of all the other toys panicking is only going to further contribute to them not being able to fully grasp what was happening to them, both from a psychological perspective in that their heads will be spinning so fast trying to process their situation that they can't think straight, and also because their voices will overpower all the outside sound they're exposed to, making it even harder to hear. Which, by the way, side note, that's also the reason why the toys are able to carry out such a passionate conversation in the van without alerting Andy's mom, because being in the trunk inside a box with cushioned seats between her and the toys will muffle the sound of their voices just as it would inside the the garbage bag, as opposed to, oh, I don't know, being completely out in the open with nothing to muffle their voices in the dead of the night in the middle of nowhere and having Buzz push one of the buttons on his chest, which may as well be the same thing as blasting an air horn at Bonnie's parents.
It's a secret mission in Eternal Rain. Let's go.
Anyway, I digress. Buzz even says,
Quiet! What's that sound?
Because they genuinely have no idea what it is. They can tell that something is happening to them, but they have no way to reasonably deduce that the ladder automatically closed and knocked the bag backwards slightly. The dump truck obviously is an exception due to how loud the revving of a massive truck like this is.
You can hear the garbage truck? It's getting closer!
Compounding their limited ability to perceive what was going on with their limited ability to reason properly when they're freaking out over the prospect of being thrown away makes it so that the toys would be entirely incapable of deducing that the bag had switched hands. Hearing Andy's mom call out, "Andy!" with no additional context is not enough to change that belief. And even if they somehow were able to tell that Andy's mom was the one to actually bring them down to the curb, that still doesn't disprove it wasn't where Andy was already planning on taking them before being interrupted due to all the previous evidence I laid out. Of course, none of them actually want to leave without saying goodbye, especially not Buzz, but even he accepts that even though he desperately doesn't want to do it, the circumstances aren't going to allow them to get back upstairs and say their farewells. They all believe Woody is safe in the college box. They all saw that happen right before their eyes when they were first thrown away, and since that's the case, they need to get packed up before the trunk is sealed and they lose their chance to go to daycare forever. Andy's mom doesn't know these toys are stowing away to donate themselves to Sunnyside, and as such, she wouldn't have a reason to come back to pick them up because she wasn't trying to donate them in the first place, and the toys have no idea when the family will be making another trip to Sunnyside, so they are on a ticking time clock. I also appreciate that the toys aren't all as equally outspoken as each other during this sequence. Most of them are simply shocked and trying to process what just happened, while the two most outspoken characters are Mr. Potato Head, because he's always been the most cynical of the group, nothing new there, and Jessie, which makes complete sense for her character because of the lingering trauma she experienced being abandoned by Emily. She isn't willing to offer Andy the same good faith generosity that Woody is given her understanding of how kids treat their toys once they grow up, capitalizing on an opportunity that she views as being a way to break the cycle of abandonment and suffering. And Buzz isn't mad about the situation in the slightest. He's looking at things strictly pragmatically, his cerebral personality perplexed as to how this could have happened because he shares Woody's perspective philosophically, but on a physical level, he also experienced the same thing that all the other toys did, so he's doing his best to keep the peace while attempting to work things out in his head for why and how this all could have happened. Nobody's character is violated in order for the toys to end up at Sunnyside. Everyone is reacting in perfect alignment with how they should behave given their history, and that holds true for the next time this conflict resurfaces when the toys have their big breakup at Sunnyside, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Sunnyside Daycare, the main setting for Toy Story 3, home to some of the movie's biggest laughs, most enthralling sequences, and most disturbingly, brilliantly written characters that I can't wait to tell you all about. But before we get to any of that, and how Sunnyside ultimately ties into the overarching thematic thrust of the story, let's just keep things in perspective and stay in the moment with Andy's mom showing up to drop off the box of toys at the daycare, where before she can even go inside, she must first knock on the door, and the woman working the front desk must buzz her in. Very clearly not a building where you are allowed to come and go as you please, and you must be granted express permission to be able to enter. A detail that might just be worth keeping in mind for a little bit later. Which, by the way, you'd hope it'd be the case that security is tight at a place like this, given that lots of small children would be running around on a daily basis. This is also when we first meet Mrs. Anderson and her daughter, Bonnie, whose pivotal importance to the outcome of the film is not at all made clear to the audience during her introduction, but not in a way that causes you to entirely dismiss her as merely being a background extra. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Even though the focus of the scene is dropping off the toys and establishing that there is a pre-existing relationship between these two families, sorta implying that Andy and Molly might have also gone to Sunnyside when they were toddlers, and that's why the parents are so friendly. Even with all that, the camera never focuses on either of the two parents or the toys as soon as we first cut to Bonnie. They hold on her face the entire rest of the time we're in this scene so you can see how she reacts to everything they're talking about. And that principle continues to be true for the rest of this first sequence at Sunnyside, with her mom calling out Bonnie's name when she goes looking for her.
Bonnie? Bonnie?
And seeing her in the background of shots as our main characters continue to move forward in the plot, so she's always there in the back of your head. You understand who Bonnie is and what her connection is to Andy's family without going so overboard with her stage presence that it makes you suspicious of why this random new girl is being focused on so much. On a smaller and more personal note, the way Bonnie acts around Andy's mom is exactly how I would act around strangers when I was her age, clutching a toy tightly to her chest to help her feel safe around someone she's never met, keeping her answers short and succinct.
Say hi, sweetie.
Hi.
And avoiding direct eye contact if at all possible. There's so much nuance in her facial expressions and where her attention is pulled towards that feels so astonishingly authentic, with how quickly she goes from mindlessly yet joyfully playing with the monkey to staring wide-eyed and frozen from the anxiety of seeing a new adult. I see that younger version of myself when I look at her in this scene, scared to death of any adults I didn't recognize. But moving on from my own personal anecdotes, once introductions wrap up, Bonnie's mom brings the toys into the butterfly room, where they get their first glimpse at how lovely and peaceful life at Sunnyside seems to be, before recess is called and they're left on their own.
Careful. These toys might be jealous of new arrivals.
Such an impeccably perfect line for Buzz Lightyear specifically to have, considering his experiences with Woody in the first movie. Then Rex gets a little too eager and tips the box right off the shelf, launching them headfirst into a horde of Sunnyside toys who passionately holler and cheer at their arrival, welcoming them all with open arms. Among these new faces, Buzz meets Sparks, a techie robot, Rex meets a horde of fellow dinosaurs, Mrs. Potato Head saddles up next to the more muscular Twitch, and the aliens, of course, find themselves gravitating toward a shot that doubles up as a bit of subtle foreshadowing for the movie's climax, but in the moment shows that the toys we know all managed to find a counterpart at Sunnyside, so they feel as comfortable and at home as possible when they first touch down. And then a horn blares from the distance as Lotso Huggin' Bear rolls up to seal the deal on the welcome wagon. The most wholesome, huggable bear in the world who appears to be thrilled to see these new toys have shown up, which he is, genuinely, just not for the reasons they think. And there's something else about this sequence that's rather subdued, that I've basically never seen get brought up when discussing this film, but is a key component of what helps this introduction to Sunnyside work so well. Anytime anyone ever talks about this part of the movie, the scenery is always described as being the most idyllic and inviting environments the toys could have imagined. The warm green tint to the room, the comfy bright lights streaming in from outside to contrast the dull atmosphere of Andy's room, and of course, the music, all contributes toward the ultimate goal of making the toys feel completely safe in this new location after all the heated debate surrounding whether or not they were making a massive mistake in donating themselves to Sunnyside. But what's so excellent about this piece of music is how it conveys that emotion through its beautifully serene woodwind instruments, while also maintaining a hint of uneasiness in the background on the strings. Same thing with the music that starts when Lotso rolls up in his dump truck, with these Cajun rhythms that represent his southern drawl. The restrained mixture of old-timey harmonica and relaxing guitar strums walks a remarkably thin line between complimenting Lotso's warm exterior and hinting towards an ominous interior. It's not strictly evil, but more foreboding, a perplexing orchestration that communicates something uncomfortable lingering in the air when you meet him and gives the audience the idea that even for all its visual splendor, there's something that isn't quite right about Sunnyside. And this isn't really a sentiment the film is trying to hide from you. In Toy Story 2, there was no indication that Stinky Pete was going to be a villain until the twist actually happens. It seemed like the clear villain of the movie for most of the runtime was Al for, Stinky stealing Woody. But when you watch the film a second time, you'll be able to pick up on the carefully calculated word choice, tone, and behavioral tics that he was employing to manipulate Woody from the minute he first arrived. But there's nothing you can reasonably glean from a first viewing that makes the twist abundantly clear to the audience, which is distinctly different from how the daycare is presented to the audience in Toy Story 3. Lotso has already fully suckered the others into believing Sunnyside is a toy's paradise, but Woody isn't falling for his tricks, and he's the character who I believe you're meant to view this scene through. Lotso acting standoffish with Woody when he first mentions that they are Andy's toys reinforces that sense of uneasiness first established by the music, as well as the camera continually cutting back to Woody's face as Lotso is touring them around the daycare, so you always have a window into his thought process, hoping to get you to see things not through the perspective of the other smitten toys, but through Woody's skepticism. Really pay close attention to Woody throughout this sequence. He was on alert from the moment Lotso first aggressively hugged Buzz, and the music does a wonderful job of conveying that sense of hominess the toys are currently feeling while still keeping rhythmic elements in the background to ground you in Woody's point of view, scoffing at Lotso's sales pitches, scanning the environment to soak up every last detail, casing his friends' expressions to see if they're actually buying into this, and feeling disappointed when it seems that they are, always noticeably physically removed from the rest of his friends. Sunnyside was clearly handcrafted to look as pleasing to the eye as possible here in the Butterfly Room, but it's not exclusively trying to trick you into buying into the illusion. It's meant to make you feel a little uneasy. That yes, everyone here seems so friendly, that they're never at risk of being discarded or broken because they have expert staff on hand to keep you in top shape. The kids are all so loving, and when they grow up, there'll be a new wave of loving kids coming in right behind them. And also you have Michael Keaton as Ken, which is among the greatest casting decisions in Pixar's history, one that Barbie is particularly happy about, but there's something off about Lotso's tone.
The little ones love new toys.
A hint of insidious implication underneath his ostensibly friendly words. Then once the toys are taken into the Caterpillar room, those feelings are even further intensified as on one hand, the lighting here is arguably an even warmer and more inviting color scheme than that of the Butterfly Room, but on the other, the stark, overbearing, mustardy yellow tone looks even more off-putting to Woody, and Lotso's chipper promise that
in a few minutes, that bell's gonna ring and you'll get the playtime that you've been dreaming of.
Comes off as more of a warning than anything else with how ominously the bell is framed in this shot, and the expedited nature of Lotso's introductory tour,
come on Ken, recess don't last forever,
creating a building feeling of dread, something which our chatter telephone friend here tries to get across to Woody before it's too late. Which all culminates in this painfully messy breakup scene that occurs after Lotso and his crew head back to the Butterfly Room, with Barbie and Ken now adorably, or perhaps annoyingly, joined at the hip. But when I say messy, I don't mean that in the sense that the scene is disjointed or sloppily written. It's messy because of how crudely this family goes their separate ways, driven apart by their conflicting ideology on what they should do with their lives now that Andy's moved on from them, which is important for strengthening the impact of their ultimate reconciliation in the final act. Yet even with how dissatisfied you are when Woody leaves the toys behind, you don't have any trouble buying into it because everyone acts in complete accordance with who their characters are, and I want to specifically highlight how Buzz responds to everything in this scene. Of all the toys, Buzz would be the last one to ever stand against Woody in a situation like this given how much they've endured and grown together, and for a while he wasn't standing against him, but he also wasn't really siding with him either. During the staff meeting, he initially confidently stands behind Woody and works with him to help reassure everyone they will be taken care of, but then, after the trash bag incident, he's perplexed. His confidence is shattered and he's still trying to figure out how things could have gotten to this point given all he's believed to be true for the last decade, and so when Woody challenges the toys' plan to go to Sunnyside, he doesn't take a side because his mind and heart are now pulling him in two different directions. I talked earlier about why the other toys are so readily willing to abandon Andy and head to Sunnyside, but it's not as clear-cut for Buzz. Like everyone else, he has a laundry list of solid reasons to believe that Andy tried to throw them away, way, but he also doesn't want to so flippantly give up on his best friend and the core principles he's believed in ever since their first adventure. So he doesn't say a word when Woody and the other toys are fighting. He stays out of the argument entirely and acts solely as a mediator, physically breaking up the fight between Woody and Jesse, telling them both off at once without singling either of them out, with his only contribution to the discussion being one very neutral comment.
Woody, wait. We need to figure out what's best for everyone.
Not specifically arguing in favor of anyone, but just hoping for all the toys to talk things out together and decide on the best possible outcome as a family. But now that he's seen Sunnyside for himself, and has verifiable observations that lead him to believe it's the heaven that they'd always been dreaming of, as opposed to vague and provocative descriptions from someone who already doesn't want them to go there, only then is he able to finally let go and stand beside the other toys in this dilemma. Even then, it's only done with extreme hesitance and reluctance, but he inevitably reached a point where he couldn't deny reality anymore, or at least what he and everyone else wholeheartedly believes to be reality. This scene is the completely natural breaking point of all the build-up throughout the entire first act. It's bitter and aggressive and loud, and yet doesn't at all feel like a forced breakup between the characters to satisfy a conventional checkbox story structure, because everyone is speaking from their hearts, and that makes this feel so sincere and raw, trying to keep things civil and level-headed for as long as they can before their emotions inevitably boil over and everyone's true feelings are laid bare, with no one wanting to hold anything back anymore. Buzz once again tries to keep the peace and extend a hand to Woody like he did at the end of the first movie to solidify their bond, but Woody's not having it anymore. He's spoken his mind clearly and decided he's fine with letting the toys stay here if that's what they want, but he's got a kid to get back to. Because of his journey in Toy Story 2, he's become even more entrenched in his commitment toward Andy than ever before, viewing any life aspirations other than staying with him to be selfish.
I can't believe how selfish you all are.
And Bullseye, bless his heart, still tries to go with Woody because he's loyal to his cowboy through and through, which we've known to be true since Toy Story 2, when he helped Woody get his arm back from Al, even knowing what that would mean for him, Jesse, and the Prospector. But Woody unfortunately must sever this bond, because for as much as he believes the toy shouldn't stay here at Sunnyside, he can't allow Bullseye to be the last toy standing all alone in the attic. Which might sound weird since he was seemingly okay with Buzz being left alone in the attic.
Come on, Buzz.
But you need to keep in mind that when he says that, he isn't expecting that Buzz is going to be the only one who joins him.
Now I'm going home. Anyone who wants to join me is welcome.
He assumes by default Buzz would come with him, but also believes enough in the power of his words to presume that at least a couple toys will join them, even though he knows they won't all do that. It's only once he realizes for the first time ever he can no longer persuade the toys about how Andy feels about them that he understands they're not coming with him, and as such wouldn't be okay with Bullseye being the sole toy left standing. And on the other side, you might be asking why the other toys are okay with Woody going home and braving the outside world all by himself, but to that I say they clearly are not okay with it. And that's a huge part of what makes this scene so heartbreaking. They don't get to reach a satisfying conclusion to their argument. Nobody's happy with how this played out, with Woody angrily storming away from the others, but there's nothing anyone can do about it. They've all said their piece, they've all made their feelings known, and now they've been forced apart as Bonnie's mom comes in looking for her daughter, necessitating Woody to capitalize on this fleeting moment to leave while the door is still open. Which then leads us into the sequence where Woody leaves Sunnyside all by himself through a series of tremendously skillful movements and split-second decisions, but we're unfortunately gonna have to save that until next time, because this also leads us to the end of Toy Story 3's first act. That's how I'm gonna be structuring things this time around. One act of the film per each video in the series. Pretty much the same format I used for my Incredibles 2 series 3 years ago, only this time I can actually talk about something I love instead of something that makes me want to jump into oncoming traffic. I really wanted to have the full 6-hour video ready in time to celebrate the anniversary, but a combination of life getting in the way and the scope of the project ballooning into something far more intensive than I ever anticipated, which is becoming something of an annoying pattern with me, ensured that even if I worked non-stop around the clock, it would still have sadly been physically impossible for me to complete it all in time. But nonetheless, I hope you all enjoyed this opening act of my love letter to Toy Story 3. If you want to keep up to date with the production of the remaining 2 parts, or if you just want to chat about movies with other members of the community, there's a link to my Discord server in the description. As it stands, I have all the audio for the remaining 2 parts fully recorded and edited, and I also have a significant amount of the visuals done. That's what makes this really annoying, is that I was, like, that close to being able to release it all at once. But hopefully there's some solace to be found in that even though I'm making you wait even longer for me to fully complete this project, you at least have something to look forward to on the channel throughout the summer on a semi-regular basis. Because even though there's already been so much worth talking about in just the first 30 minutes of the movie, from intricate plotting to challenging character dynamics and early seeds of the broader thematic strokes, we also have so much else left to cover in the remaining 5 hours of the series, as the best Toy Story 3 has to offer is yet to come. And the story is just gonna keep getting better and better the further into it we get, because as we move into the second act, we'll be able to dissect all the individual cogs making up the elaborate prison escape sequence, the unparalleled hilarity in the form of Spanish Buzz, and everything that makes Lotso such a terrifying and thematically poignant villain for our heroes to go up against once his true colors are revealed for all to see. And once that happens, we will also finally be able to once and for all disprove the infuriatingly pervasive criticism that Toy Story 3 is nothing but a complete, shameless retread of Toy Story 2. Yeah, that one. I still got a lot of incredible storytelling to sing my heart out over, and a lot of burning frustration I've been meaning to get off my chest for quite a while. All of that and more in just 2 weeks' time. Hopefully. Also, to preempt any questions I may receive about this in the comments, yes, I know Elio is coming out this week, and no, I do not have any intentions of reviewing it on the channel. I'm still gonna go see it, and I would encourage you all to do the same to show Pixar we do, in fact, want to see more original stories from them and aren't exclusively interested in them pumping out sequel after sequel for infinity and beyond. But as far as making videos is concerned, I want to focus all my time and energy on finishing this Toy Story 3 No, wrong click, goddammit! On finishing this Toy Story 3 series. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope to see you all in July for the second act of my love letter to Toy Story 3. Goodbye!